Welcome to Babblecom 5. This is episode 11 of season 2 of Babylon 5, All Alone in the Night. Delenn has been summoned to appear before the Grey Council to discuss her status following her transformation. She is prepared for the possibility of losing her ambassadorial position as well as her position on the council. Lanier feels she is worrying unnecessarily, as her position was a matter of soul, not flesh, but Delenn is more realistic. Lanier seeks to reassure her that she is never alone. Ivanova briefs Sheridan on reports of strange sightings and missing ships in Sector 92. He dismisses raiders as a possibility, as they are still depleted. As two Wings of Furies are out on a mission, and Delta Wing's leader is sick, he decides to investigate for himself, as there's no clear and present danger, and he's keen to keep his space-time up. The next scene, showing us a Narn fighter being assaulted and its escape pod drawn into a larger alien ship, would seem to indicate otherwise, i.e. there is going to be a clear and present danger. Lanier has taken it upon himself to accompany Delenn, borrowing a flyer from their courier. She is concerned that her disfavour with the council will spread to him, but he is unconcerned, owing as she observes to his youth. She asks if she has told him how much she appreciates him lately, and he responds in the negative, saying it will give them something to talk about on their journey. Sheridan is preparing to leave when Ivanova tells him that General Haig is to arrive early. She hadn't been informed and is not impressed, but Sheridan explains it's an informal visit only. He hadn't told her because he was planning too near at the time, which of course has only just moved up. There's an interesting look on his face as he turns away from her, however. Garibaldi, Franklin and a Fury pilot are discussing baseball at a bar. Comedy moment. A bet ensues. Ramirez is then called to the Fury launch bay as part of Sheridan's escort. He launches, happy to be back in space and showboating as he flies away from the station, backwards. Ivanova tells him to stop showing off in front of the other pilots. They jump out. Delenn and Lanier arrive at the Grey Council's cruiser, where it is clear again that Delenn is fond of Lanier, but she must go on alone. He bids her farewell as Satire Delenn. Sheridan's search pattern has come up empty, but as they prepare to return to the gate, the unknown ship we glimpsed earlier jumps in on top of them, and he and his wing member go evasive. The vessel is fast and agile, and opens fire, crippling Sheridan's engines and forcing him to eject in his command module as his Fury explodes behind him. His wingmate is taken out, as is Ramirez's, and Sheridan's module is tracted into the unknown vessel before it opens a jump point back into hyperspace. Ramirez shouts his frustration, but his Fury is badly damaged and he cannot pursue. His computer advises his ship is low on power, and worse, he is being exposed to radiation from his fusion reactor, which is already at lethal levels and increasing. He sucks up this news and redirects energy to propulsion, limping back to the jump gate so he can report in. Haig has arrived, with Ivanova explaining Sheridan has yet to report in, which surprises him as he's never late. On the alien ship travelling in hyperspace, Sheridan is restrained, and various nasty-looking probes descend from the ceiling as he struggles. On the Grey Council's cruiser, Delenn appears in their chamber and recites their oath to Satai, but she remains the only figure in the light. Satai Koplan appears, holding the triluminary staff, and says she is there to receive judgment, not to be one of the 9. In undergoing her change without the Council's blessing, who told her to wait, she has quite literally alienated herself from them, so she is no longer Satai, but she queries her position as ambassador, given that role is not dependent on being Satai, and questions who their new leader is. She does not receive an answer, but is told she can make a statement before the 9. Ramirez's Fury has made it back through the Babylon 5 gate on autopilot with minimal life signs present, and Ivanova alerts Medlab. Sheridan is gifted a metal bar as his restraints are removed, and he quickly finds himself on the receiving end of another metal bar being wielded by Manik Drazi with some form of implant attached to his head. Sheridan tries to get through to him, but ultimately he seems to kill himself. He vanishes, and a similarly controlled Narn with a sword takes his place. Despite his fighting his implant and demanding to be killed, Sheridan manages to knock him out rather than kill him. Franklin can do nothing for Ramirez back in Medlab, to his immense frustration, and Ramirez manages to say it looks like he won't get to win his bet after all before he passes. Garibaldi tries to console Franklin as Ivanova arrives, having analysed the flight data. It's apparent that Sheridan was taken, but they don't have the ship on file, so they don't know where it might be going. Delenn appears before the Grey Council in civilian clothes, asking that her sacrifice not be in vain, that she is outcast, but still follows their goal of preparing for the great war that is coming. In the name of their 20 cycles of friendship, she asks to remain on Babylon 5 to finish her work there. It turns out that her replacement, Neroon, is more than happy for her to stay on Babylon 5. Delenn is outraged. He is warrior caste, and has bad blood with Delenn since the Season 1 episode Legacies. Her replacement should have been religious caste to maintain balance in the Grey Council, as Valen created the council with 3 religious, 3 warrior and 3 worker caste for that reason. Possibly the first time the worker caste has been mentioned. As the warriors now have 4 in the council, they have unprecedented power, and when Delenn says this is wrong, Neroon angrily retorts that the warriors have been defending Minbari for ages and fought the Earth-Minbari War while the Grey Council floated amongst the stars. And if, as her prophecy states, a great war is coming, why shouldn't the warriors lead? He can't believe that they stopped the Earth-Minbari War for, having now been told why. He refuses to recognise her as Minbari, but says this does make her the perfect ambassador, and is the only home she has left. She is left in a solitary circle of light in the chamber. Sheridan allies himself with the Narn, who believes the ship is assessing other races as prospects for invasion. Still no sign of its crew, or any food or water. They seem to be assessing biology, survival instincts, strengths, getting an idea of technology from their ships. Sheridan resolves to escape as the Narn passes out from his broken ribs. Delenn returns to the waiting Linnea. She explains that she is no longer Satai, but does not disillusion him of his belief in the Council's wisdom. He says he will remain by her side while he lives, having been given the option to return home. Delenn says she will be going into darkness, into fire, but could not wish for a better companion if he chooses to remain. They take their leave of the ship. Haig and Ivanova have 2 new reports of scouting missions by the enemy ship, and its details have been passed to the ambassadors. Haig has been making some calls too, and Sheridan's old ship the Agamemnon jumps in to assist once they have something to hunt for. On the alien ship, Sheridan drifts into sleep and dreams a dream full of symbolism, with Ivanova asking if he knows who she is, Garibaldi saying the man in the middle is looking for him, and Kosh appearing with possibly his most coherent lines ever, that Sheridan can now hear him because his mind is quiet, and that he has always been here. As he wakes, Sheridan sees that a hatch is opened a fraction, and ponders using the Narn's sword as a lever. Delenn manages to get through to the station, having been trying for a while, and says that she knows the alien ship's race, the Stribes. They once made the mistake of gathering Minbari samples, and were taught the error of their ways when the Minbari followed them back to their homeworld. She has its coordinates. The alien ship is heading in towards its homeworld in real space, when the Agamemnon jumps in with Furies and Delenn in escort, immediately opening fire and striking the Stribe ship amidships. Ivanova is piloting Fury herself, and orders them to acquire external targets only. Delenn orders the Stribe to release their prisoners. Sheridan and the Narn make full use of the attack to complete their jailbreak, knocking out a grey-looking Stribe on their way to a survival pod. The other captives are not so lucky, the Stribe spacing them during the combat. Ivanova is infuriated by this and orders them taken out, and the Agamemnon finishes the ship off with its beam weapons. However, Ivanova recognises the Morse code SOS Sheridan's pod is transmitting and orders fire held so he can be rescued. On the station, the Narn will recover, and Sheridan is saddened by the loss of Ramirez so young, saying it isn't fair. He survived when Ramirez didn't. Franklin agrees. As Sheridan leaves MedLab, Kosh is in the corridor and says, "You have always been here," just as he did in Sheridan's dream on the Stribe ship, giving him and us something to wonder about. General Haig finally has the chance to catch up with Sheridan and activates a jamming device in his quarters to prevent eavesdropping. Sheridan bemoans the fact that it's been 6 months since he had any contact with him, and he doesn't like spying on his fellow officers. Haig says that isn't really what he's been doing, but that they have to know who they can trust. Haig notes that Sheridan's record makes him look like a yes man, a jarhead, so Clark's supporters won't look at him too closely, and Haig needs that, because they both know that the government has been compromised by Santiago's assassination. They just don't have enough hard evidence as to who was behind it. Both clearly see Psychor as a likely hostile actor, but not necessarily the only one, so they have to proceed carefully, and before Haig leaves he asks Sheridan to make a decision about whether he wants to risk his career by fully committing to help Haig. He clearly does make that choice, because we then see him bring Garibaldi, Ivanova and Franklin into the fold, having borrowed Haig's jammer. They're all in, and so we move into the second half of the season with a significant twist under our belts. I must admit I was trying to remember what this episode was going to cover, and had forgotten just how momentous it actually is, placing a rather neat marker down halfway through the season, that just when you thought you knew what the focus of the season was, all of a sudden you don't really. We know the Narn Centauri conflict is still rumbling away in the background, but we haven't seen much of it yet. Instead, we have three rather interesting elements intertwined and a big box opened. So, the Babylon 5 command crew is far from being alone in its suspicion around the true nature of Santiago's death and Clark's rise to power. As the viewer, we've known that for some time, and we've known there was a question mark as to whose side Sheridan might be on, although his conversation with Clark earlier in the season indicated no love lost, of course. All of a sudden, we have a general on board as well who's keen on to use B5 as a method of gathering intelligence against the conspirators. That, of course, means that EarthGov is effectively at odds with itself, albeit in a very low-key way at the moment. The command crew are going to support Sheridan, and so they all now have an additional burden to carry between them. And all this was done in just the last few minutes of the episode, the only other hint being that there was something slightly unorthodox about the General's visit. All Alone in the Night refers to many aspects of this episode, ranging from Ramirez in his fury to Delenn. Let's look at Sheridan first. Abducted out of the blue, or should that be the black, with no support. Interesting that his instincts to try and reach out to the aliens he finds himself trapped alongside, even using their native language to try and get through to them. Here is an officer who has hands-on experience with their cultures and intelligence enough to know when to try and use it and when to just shut up and fight. Not really a side of him we've seen thus far. Also a very good pilot, clearly, who is keen to retain his wings by getting some flight time in, a trait he shares with Sinclair. The dream on board the Strive ship I could discuss at some length, but it's worth watching and listening to very carefully for yourself because it sets up many puzzles. Watch, for example, how Sheridan's uniform morphs during it. And then we have Kosh, appearing in the dream seemingly not as an element of it, but as a broadcast of his mind. Otherwise, why would he have repeated "You have always been here" to Sheridan outside of Medlab? As to how he managed that, presumably we're looking at long-range telepathy, as he refers to Sheridan's mind being quiet, but no human telepath could do that. Very interesting. While John was battling technological demons, Delenn of course had to face up to some of her own. Even with Lanier there, she began her Grey Council visit alone, and ended it even more alone, as they stripped her of her rank. They also, perhaps, stripped her of her belief in the sanctity of the Council, created by Valian in the past, now left unbalanced by the appointment of a warrior caste member in her place. This has clearly shaken her, yet she retains composure enough throughout to plead her case for remaining on Babylon 5, perhaps the only place now she will not feel alone in the night. It doesn't shake Lanier's faith in her, perhaps the opposite, and we see that he has grown a little more confident with her and in expressing his feelings to her. I think he'll always see her as Satai. Ramirez's passing clearly has an impact on Franklin, and again we see a Fury pilot not treated as a nameless player, but as someone with whom the crew have a relationship, so his death has consequences, even to the point that Sheridan feels survivor's guilt when nothing he could have done would have altered the situation. With everything else that's gone on this episode, it was nice to see that focused on, rather than just dismissed. In amongst the big reveals, we are also treated to a lot of action, with a genuinely unusual and really quite beautiful alien ship design. The Agamemnon is probably the first Omega we see actively engaged in hostilities and opening fire as soon as it comes out of a jump point is impressive, because Jakar has mentioned that Narn ships tend to suffer a power drain having just formed a jump point. Despite its speed, the Strive ship is clearly outmatched by the combination of Star Furies and Capital ship when it doesn't have the advantage of surprise. Nice to see Delenn supporting the action directly as well. Were I to nitpick, I would have to wonder why the Strive ship didn't get any more support as its homeworld. but then at sublight speeds, local forces' reaction times wouldn't necessarily be fast enough to make a difference. In case you're wondering, the Furies would have waited for the Agamemnon token jump points for them to use, so it would tend to arrive last and leave last to allow the Furies to transit. Although B5's Furies were supporting her, she does carry her own as well. I remember being really impressed with this episode first time round. Setting some of it on an alien ship with a nod to Roswellian greys was a very unusual thing for B5 to do at that point, and the graphics and pacing for the ship combat were very much better than, say, in Season 1's Signs and Portents. It's all more polished than the first season, and yet, as I often hark on about, much of the storyline of this episode is dependent on plot lines created in Season 1. The significance of Naru now being on the Grey Council will not have been lost on early adopters of the series, as ironically last time they met, Delenn used her position on the council to put him back in his box. Now the tables are turned. Maybe some of the ship interior CGI doesn't hold up quite so well, but other than that, there's really very little in this episode to suggest that it was made in the mid-90s. I also like the actor playing Haig. He and Ivanova worked well together, I thought. You might recognise him, ironically, from a Deep Space Nine episode, which he joined later, where he is also involved in a coup. As a Vulcan on Enterprise, and having looked him up, it's Robert Foxworth. He also voiced Ratchet in the live-action Transformers movies. It's a small world, as these are all franchises I like. I did say in my introduction to this playlist that I wasn't going to be a talking head on these videos, but I have tinkered a smidgen with this as a concept now, and maybe I could do it on the movies, where even more typing would otherwise be involved to prep them. Assuming anyone gets this far, let me know in the comments if you'd like to see that. Catch you next week for the entry into the second half of Season 2.